All righty. Let's get Kent. Let's get the show on the. Let's see. Hey,
What's up?
what's going on?
All
I,
right.
I'm gonna bring up my notes real quick because I want to make sure we're on track because this is a good topic for sure. For sure.
Good.
Okay.
I'm glad you took notes because I decided to riff on this one and just speak from the heart. So I may follow your lead. Let's see what happens. So,
I I just want to say that of all the podcasts where we say that we are not the subject matter experts, I am so the subject matter expert in this one.
I think we all are, right? I mean, everybody's been in a toxic relationship. I mean, if we escape that, we're escaping a lot of the human obstacles that we have to go through and learn. And it's how do you feel about your toxic relationships being on the other side of them? Do you feel like you regret them? Do you feel that you have learned a lot from them? What's your take?
I think now, in hindsight, and understanding at my patterns, um, understanding what I was looking for and not understanding myself, I think regardless of whether I liked it or not, I had to go through it to become who I am now.
Yeah,
And that's a big pill to swallow because no one likes to get hurt. And
yeah.
I was in a perpetual cycle of getting hurt, relationship after relationship after relationship. Um, Work environment is a little bit different. You're kind of tossed with a population of people, so you get bits and pieces of it or whatever. But I realized I was in a vicious cycle. So at the time, it sucked balls, right? Like no one likes to cry and hurt all the time. Now I can say thank you because I know who I am now.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the key word is cycle and pattern, right? Because we get stuck in a pattern that's familiar to us. So I'll start out like we always do and just do a definition. Toxic relationships, one that involves harmful, damaging behaviors, dynamics, or interactions that negatively impact the emotional, mental, or physical well-being of individuals involved. So, what do you think about that?
I do. Uh, I agree with that. I also want to say that um, I was involved in a toxic relationship with myself. Does that make sense? That it's
Yeah,
not, it wasn't with another person. So when you were saying harmful reactions or behaviors or whatever, I was causing my own. So I could say that my own toxic relationship with myself also added onto the toxic relationships that I was in that cycle with.
yeah. So you're saying that it started with you and the patterns that were in yourself. And are you saying the way you view yourself and you view the world? Say a little bit more about that.
So yeah, like I had a picture in my mind of what a normal family would be, and it wasn't coming to fruition, and I couldn't understand why. I couldn't understand why. And I think it was when you're growing up and you're always told no, or you're always told this or that, you're already starting with that unworthiness
Hmm.
within you,
Right.
right? And that unworthiness that you inadvertently pick up, that you're not aware of it, you start attracting it. So you're going to attract people that also feel unworthy,
Hmm.
but show it in different ways.
Yeah, yeah. So I think a good place to start with talking about, because what we're talking about is toxic relationships and how we can break free of toxic relationships, is what how does it start with us? And I think that's beautiful because really doesn't everything when we're talking about bettering ourselves, living a better life, it always starts with us, because the opposite of that is blaming other people. And if we blame other people, of course, as the saying goes, when we're pointing our finger, remember we were talking about this, there are three fingers pointing back at us, and it's really saying there's something going on with us that we need to see more clearly.
Mhm.
So if I am attracting and am attracted to, I think that's fair to say, I am attracted
Mhm.
to, and people are attracted to me in a way where there is a pattern, then there is something in me that is consistent. I'm the common denominator. So, how do I take responsibility? How do I take responsibility? How do I change myself so I can change the pattern? So, as we saw in the definition, toxic relationship means it's harmful to ourselves and to the other person involved too. I think it's really important to point out when we're talking about toxic relationships is that you see so much stuff on the internet. People, I think it's toxic the way people can talk about toxic relationships sometimes when they just blame the other person. This person is a narcissist. You know, I mean, we're all on the spectrum of narcissism, and a certain amount of narcissism is healthy, right?
Mhm.
So to say this person is a narcissist, this person is bad, well, that makes me into a victim, and it takes a lot of responsibility off myself, and that disempowers me and keeps me from changing. You know, in my opinion, by just blaming the other person and saying these are the signs that this person is toxic, and therefore, yes, it's helpful to have that awareness and know what I'm going to get out of. But what you're saying that's so beautiful is, what is it in me that I need to change and that is making me attracted and being attracted to people who aren't healthy for me. So you were talking about self-esteem.
Yeah, and I think like everything else, we always choose the hard way to learn things. So when you're a child, don't touch the hot stove or the hot iron. And you're like, okay, you told me not to, so I'm going to touch it. And then you learn through the experience that you burned yourself. And next time you won't touch the hot stove or the hot iron. And it took multiple times of me touching a hot iron to finally stop and say, how did I get
Yeah.
here? I really think, you know, I I always look back and I'm like, if I would have been 20 something years old, if I would have been 30 something years old, would I have caught on to it? Would I have been in the situation at that time where I would have caught on to these cycles that I was attracting to? And I don't think I was mature enough at that time to catch on. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been, continuing on with the with the cycle in my like 30s and 40s, right? So um it took a while for me to finally start questioning. And I think it started with the victim mode. Why me? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a valid start. Why me? And it's okay to feel and be the victim for a while.
Hmm. Let me think about that in what my opinion is about being the victim. Can I tweak that and say this really hurts and I am in pain and I really need to acknowledge that and know that this is something that's really uncomfortable. Therefore, there's something that needs to change. Or are you saying that if I am I'm a victim, what I think when someone says that, it's that, there's someone who's the perpetrator and I was not as responsible. So I don't know. Do you think that's a healthy phase to go through?
Well, I think this is part of, strategies that depends on people because we obviously have two different ways of looking at it. For me, when I was saying, why me? Like, what did I do to deserve this? And I fell into that victimhood bracket. It actually motivated me to start looking in back and start reevaluating myself
Mm-hmm.
as to why I get into different patterns. But I had to put myself in that victim mode in order to get there. If
Okay.
at that time I had been practicing mindfulness, and even though I was just starting. So the whole concept of like, this is really hurting me. I should feel the anger, I should process it, and things of that nature didn't even come to my mind because I wasn't there yet. So I think I had to go through the victim role
Yeah.
in order to, get me started onto appreciating where I'm at now.
Yes, yes. Well, we look at the stages of grief, and one of the stages is anger. We have sadness, we have depression that we go through, and we have bargaining, that we go through in our minds. And then we get to the point where we have acceptance. And acceptance is a beautiful thing. And we can talk about grief, but moving through the phases, I think a beginning just to relate to what you're saying, I think a really good part of our grief process is anger. And when we have anger, so much of the time we're pointing the finger at somebody else. You did this to me, and if you didn't do this to me, I would be okay. And there can be a self-justified anger, and that's part of the process that we have to go through to get that. So let's look at, if you don't mind, let's look at toxic relationships, how we do in fact attract toxic relationships. And you hit on one of the first things, and that is our self-esteem, how we see ourselves. And that's the definition I'm giving. You can give another definition if you'd like, but our self-esteem is how we see ourselves. I mean, and so how we see ourselves is always running in the background, whether we're aware of it or not. Mm-hmm. And we're broadcasting how we see ourselves. I mean, we're giving that forward. If I don't feel good about myself, it will show in my posture. It will show in the way I talk. If I'm putting myself down and my posture's like this, and if I'm full of self-criticism, I will feel apologetic about how I approach people. So that is, and we could keep going on that list of ways we can be when we're broadcasting someone who doesn't think highly of ourselves. When someone who is more of a perpetrator, someone who is damaged, someone who needs to prey on our insecurities, and we can talk about that in more detail too. We meet them, they pick up on that. Maybe we put ourselves down. Maybe we're apologizing. Maybe we are afraid that we're going to interrupt someone. Maybe our posture is slumped over, and or we just seem sad. That person can see that. So it's not this, and I think it's really helpful to say, in my opinion, it's not this mystical thing where we attract, just because we put it out there in the universe. We are actually acting in a certain way that people pick up on and people can prey upon by what we're giving off. So I think one thing that we need to know is how we see ourselves is how, number one, we are attracting people, but number two, and this is the next thing we can talk about too, is what we feel like we deserve. And if we feel like we deserve bad treatment, we're going to put up with it. And it really isn't that complicated, right? I know that from my own experience.
I think another thing too is I think you've mentioned a lot of things that you're kind of you can be aware of your posture and how you talk about yourself or whatever. But I also feel that the majority are completely unaware of those things.
Yes.
Right. So I was completely unaware. If I slouched, I didn't know. I thought I was just slouching because it's, more comfortable for me to slouch. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I I have a very strong personality. I'm very outgoing.
Mm-hmm.
What I didn't realize that part of my problem is I was seeking validation and I'm an
Mm-hmm.
enabler. So those are two things that I think are not really talked about. Being an enabler, what does that mean? Well, just trying to please people all the time, right? Trying to make everything, kosher, making sure everything's okay, and then that the other person will lose respect. But all of this in your mind, again, is part of being unaware. You're just doing what you were taught to do, help others, be kind, you know, make sure that everybody's ready first before you, you know, those are things that are instilled in us, and we just think of it as just part of our society and our role in society, not knowing that we are lacking boundaries.
Well, I think that can come under our self-esteem, how we see ourselves,
Mhm.
but it's not just that. It's our survival. It's how we've
Yeah.
learned to survive. In childhood, if we had invalidating parents, if we had parents who were domineering, if the way we fit into our family was to please, and that's how we survive, because it's really important to point out that when we're children, we look at our parents as the alpha and the omega. They are what keep us alive, and we have to please them in some sort of way, usually. So that is why there are so many people pleasers. I don't know about, well, yeah, I do know about you because you just told me that you've fallen into people pleasing. I sure in the hell have too. And it is a really unfortunate place to be in, because we are not honoring ourselves. We're not being authentic. We are not being honest, and we're actually doing people in our lives a disservice because they don't know where we stand when we are lacking boundaries, and we are lacking that ability to say, hey, here's what I want, here's what my needs are. So that is one very important bullet point, right? That
Mhm.
people pleasing can be a big factor in allowing ourselves to get into toxic relationships, because what you're saying is we're lacking boundaries. And we don't have boundaries. We are wide open to toxic people because we're not honoring ourselves. And when people see that we don't have boundaries, the bullies, the people who, and again, I want to say it's not that these people are necessarily evil. They just have their own damaged childhoods and they're playing out their own dancing pattern. And they think, oh, okay, this is how perhaps one example could be, this is how I feel validated, by being in control, by being able to dominate someone. So there's this dance. This is one example, is there's the people pleaser, which is the one who attracts the toxic person, the person who is more the perpetrator, and then there is the domineering person who is more of the bully. And there's this dance of, I'm going to please you and I'm going to put you down, or what, and there's this little dance that happens. And so therefore, to bring it back to what you said at the beginning, we're responsible and we have to see what the common denominator is, which is ourselves, right?
Yeah, and one thing you just said that, kind of triggered me a little bit was acknowledging that these people are not evil,
Mm-hmm.
because it's easy for us to say, oh my god, that person is evil, your boss, that person that you have to work with, or that person at school that you have to do that project with, and you're like, oh my god, they're so evil. It really isn't. It's just how they're processing the same hurt as we are, except they just take it to the other extreme. So does that make you evil too?
Well, yeah, as we said when we talked about the subject before, is that saying, hurt people. And we usually attract someone and are attracted to someone who's in the same level of hurt. They're just different brands of it, different
Mm-hmm.
varieties of it. And that is how, so if one of us grows, a lot of times we'll grow out of a relationship, or that other person outgrows us, or we just go in different directions. But so the reason that, in my experience, because I started out like so many of us as a young adult in victimhood, I was someone who blamed other people. And what did I get out of that? Well, I got being right. I got, having a feeling of where people would feel for me, feel self pity. I got to feel this feeling like, oh gosh, there's something special about me with my hurts. So I was getting something out of it, but it is a huge trade-off, because we have so much resentment, so much anger, so much unnecessary emotional anguish that we have to deal with when we are not owning our part of it. So me pointing the finger and being a victim and blaming that other person, and I always know I'm blaming them when I'm calling them a name.
Mm-hmm.
He's an asshole. She's a bitch. They're evil. They're a narcissist. Whatever. And I'm sorry, but narcissist. I'm not a psychologist, so it's not my job, in my opinion, to label someone a narcissist. Maybe if someone gives that label, maybe there's a time and a place for it. But that's a name to call someone, and I know I'm having a strong opinion about that. I just that's the new craze these days about this is a narcissist, and it really works well for our minds because we're like, oh, this fits into a box, and now I can. So that person's an asshole, and I'm good, and that's just not the case. And this seems to be the theme that we're talking about. We have to see that this other person is screwed up just like we are, and this is one of the biggest things I learned as a young adult is to realize that I am messed up, I am screwed up, I am damaged, just like that other person. And I'm not damaged necessarily because my parents were these horrible, messed up people. It's because they were doing the best they could. And this is part of our journey through life, is that we, as you were saying at the beginning, is we have these pains, we have these hard lessons that we learn from being off the mark, which is what sin means. Sin just means off the mark. It's an archery term that says we missed the target. So when we miss the target, we feel pain. And when we feel pain, it's an action signal. It is an alarm for us to say, hey, there's something in me that needs to be changed. And the way I need to start, and that at least in my experience, to start is to not blame someone else, because when I've blamed someone else, then I am robbing myself and taking away an opportunity to grow and to get out of that pattern. That's what I would say.
Oh, that's beautiful. I think I didn't learn until I was an older adult. But what I did do was I I just left the situation without addressing myself.
Yeah.
Right? So things were going down. I didn't like it. I stayed as long as I could to try to repair it or whatever, because we can't fix other people, right? I mean, I didn't know that, but I was, hopeful, trying to fix people. And then I just bounced. That was my way. So I always bypassed without realizing that I had stuff to do within myself, to look at myself. So I just said, well, next person, next person, next person, until just recently, or I mean, not so recently, but still I was finally able to catch on to that. So um it was easy for me to just leave and stick with that. Well, you have issues, you have a problem, you know
Mhm.
I don't need closure because you're obviously, cuckoo for cocoa puffs.
Yeah.
I'm moving on.
Right.
So that was something that I also had to um realize. You can't just bounce. You have to really take the time to look within yourself to do that. So let's talk about, how do you look within yourself? I think
Hmm.
we've pretty much said that, it's about
Yeah.
awareness. You got to question yourself. We do these things out of habit, and if it's a habit, we realize we don't really know we're doing it because it's habitual,
Yeah.
year over year. And it's not something that you can do, like, if you do this for 21 days, you'll break the habit. No, 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 no. This is way different than that.
Yeah.
Um,
Wouldn't it be nice if there were 10 steps to blah, blah, blah? That's what's sold to us so much of the time, but it's a messy, crooked path. And it's a 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps back, 5 steps forward. But we do it in our own but messy way. But what my experience is that it's the intention and determination of, first and foremost, that I am going to live this life as a student of the world, and I am going to be someone who learns from my lessons. So I think that's the first step to talk about, because that's a beautiful thing that you're bringing up. I believe is that, how do we look within ourselves? Well, one way is to know that is to have that intention that I am going to grow. Number two is to know that when I am unaware and there are patterns running in the background that are causing me to be off the mark, the signal is that I'm in pain, is that there's unneeded conflict within myself and my relationships. Because if I was on the mark and I was living in accordance with the highest version of myself, which we usually don't do, then we're going to be feeling like we're in the flow. We're going to be happy. But when there's conflict with ourselves and other people, then and we're suffering, then that's a signal to look inside of ourselves. So then what's another step to look inside of ourselves? Well, I think you said it, and I'll let you take it from here, but is mindfulness. And mindfulness is, that's another overused term, and it's a beautiful thing that it's so used now, because we're bringing something that's so simple that we have overlooked in our Western society for so long. And obviously there's a guy named Gautama, the Buddha, who came up with it, was one of the first people to talk about it 2,500 years ago. And it's so simple. It's about becoming aware, because the definition of insanity, what's the definition of insanity? You know, right?
No.
Doing the same thing over and over and
Oh,
expecting
yes,
a
yes,
different
yes.
result. Yeah.
I was thinking, well,
It's
crazy.
right. You thought I was like asking you to just pull a Webster definition out. Yeah.
I know. I was like, wait, not prepared for that.
That wouldn't have been fair. No, it's just become, very, very like a saying, like almost like a colloquialism in our society now, that, this doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is insanity. So why does that happen? It's because we're unaware. Well, how do we start to become aware? Well, know that I want to grow, because if we don't, and we just realize the opposite of that is that we just want to feel comfortable no matter what, then we will go to sleep. We will not be aware, and we will let those patterns run in the background. So first to have the intention, then to know when we are in pain, there's something that's calling us to learn so we can be a better version of ourselves. And then, so with mindfulness is to become aware. That's all it is to pay attention to your experience, to pay attention to, okay, let's just use an example. I just had an argument with my significant other, and she said something and I lost my temper. And I feel defensive right now, and I'm blaming her, but I also feel bad about the way I acted. Okay, so let's look at that. That's an example of mindfulness. And obviously, to become aware during the interaction is what the ultimate goal is, and to catch ourselves in the act, but then to play the tape back and say, all right, well, I lost my temper. Why did I lose my temper? I was defensive. Why was I defensive? Well, she said something about me that was true. For instance, like, I don't respect her time. Now, maybe that was an overgeneralization, and I'm using a real example about myself. I could be late sometimes. And it's a real example that someone I was dating said, I don't respect her time. Now, I think in this example, it was that when she would show up at my place, I was just getting out of the shower, and she was hungry and ready to go out to eat or whatever. So, so if this exact example isn't true for me, but if I did get, and I have gotten defensive plenty in my life, but say in that example, I did get defensive and start yelling at her, I'm like, oh, well, what she told me was actually true. And that's why, and I didn't want to see it. So what we have to do is we have to own our stuff. And this is a place where I need to change. This is just one example. And I need to clean it up with that person through my actions, and to let them know that, I was not okay. And that was not okay what I did. And so this is an example of emotional maturity, to be able to hear something, to not get defensive. That's one example. But that doesn't mean that there aren't people treating us in ways where they are hurting us because they are trying to control us, and what their needs are unhealthy. But that's not the conversation we're having right now. This conversation's gone in a really cool direction. So awareness and it would be one example, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. And the what you were talking about, the example, the emotional maturity, that would be the end goal. And it would be amazing if the people that you're dealing with, who you're just dealing with, are also at that level of maturity. And that's what you strive to do. As you become a better version of yourself, you'll start attracting more and more people who are growing in their level of maturity. One thing that I feel like I want to say is, within all of that is willpower. Because, you know, breakups, you're upset, you go through all this roller coaster of emotions. Or, and I'm just talking about specifically with breakups, it's going to be different obviously for workplaces, but you want to call that person back, or you miss having somebody with you, or things of that nature. And one thing that I know, that when I went through my therapist or whatever, the one thing no one mentioned was you just really have to stick through it. Right? Put one foot, they did tell me, put one foot in front of the other. Don't worry about going too many steps ahead, just one foot in front of the other. But it's really willpower to push through this painful, through the tears, through the
Yeah.
anger,
Yeah.
through everything. Just it's a completely different level of like willpower getting to the gym the next day, because you don't want to, right? Because it's starting to get cold, you want to stay in your blankets or whatever. This is completely different. This is a full
Mm-hmm.
emotional, physical, psychological willpower
Yes.
to stick to it. And I can't be mad and I can't judge those people that are in domestic violence relationships,
Right.
because they don't know any better, and they know how to cope with an existing situation than it is to have the willpower to break out of that situation, even though logically they know that they are not in the right place. They
Yeah.
know logically, but it's that you have to get that surge of something, of some sort of faith, some sort of willpower to go on that path. And it's so difficult.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is leaving a situation when you need to leave it and you see it's unhealthy. And, why is it that you, me, and all of us almost are in relationships that are unhealthy? A toxic relationship could be when you're physically abused, you're mentally abused, you're controlled, you are um, you're being criticized incessantly, gaslighted. In other words, somebody saying, "Well, what you just said is just not valid. What your needs are and
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying and what your perspective is, it's just crazy, and you're just dismissing it." So those are some examples. So the definition of insanity, what we do as human beings, unfortunately, is we go into the ring with a champion boxer and we get beat up, and then we get beat up the next day. And then after weeks of being beat up, we're going in to that ring saying, how am I not going to get beat up today? And so why do we do that? Well, we do that, and we have to, I believe, have compassion for ourselves, is because it's built into our biology that we want, number one, to stay with what's familiar. We want what's familiar because that's what we know, and it usually comes from our childhood. But also, when it is always about survival for us, because we have these patterns that were put together in our these patterns, these neural pathways that were put in place because it was the way that we survived as children. So if we were invalidated because that person that maybe the parent had a very low self-esteem, or maybe they were invalidated, or maybe they were just upset or angry about life, whatever it was, if that's what we know, we're usually going to seek that out in a relationship. And that familiarity is, well, I know from my experience that I equated love with criticism, and those two went together. If someone loved me, they criticized me because of experiences I had had in the past. So I sought out relationships because it was familiar with someone who loved me, said they loved me, but always told me what, not always, I got to catch myself from saying words like always, but had a tendency to put me down. And that was the familiar groove. Now, and just I don't want to let you say what about this, what your experience is, but with me going to a relationship where someone didn't criticize me, it felt boring.
Yes. We're addicted to the chaos.
It
Yes.
felt boring because I was used to equating love
Yep.
with 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 criticism and drama. So then there's this healthy person, I would go to them and there was no drama, and I'm like, this isn't juicy. So I had to own that in myself and realize that this is healthy love. So in full disclosure, yes, that one pattern of victimization I got over at a young age, but toxic relationships went way into adulthood. And I
Oh
have to
my
say,
God.
I do want to say, if my ex-wife is listening to this, Tara, you are not in that category, because she wasn't. She's not. So I got lucky with that. But so anyway, you have things to say, Nada.
Oh
Talk.
my gosh. Well, I'm a chatterbox. I always have things to say. No, no, no. But that's the other side of it. So we're here in this toxic relationship and what have you, how to break free from it, what's the signs to see, mindfulness, willpower. But you're right. Once you get to the other side and you actually meet someone who's healthy, you start questioning yourself again. You know, this this guy or this woman is perfectly fine. Like, why am I not attracted to them? Why don't I want to hang out with them? And then you go back into a pattern without even realizing that you're in the pattern, right? And this one versus when you're in a bad relationship, if you feel it, you know it. You know that, there's something wrong. Like I said, intellectually, you understand that it's not right. Like it's not right
Yes.
that they're putting you down. It's not right. But then the other person is giving you a compliment. You're like, wait, how do I take that? Ew, And you gonna know how to maneuver, you gonna know how to adapt, you gonna know that's the other thing no one tells you. How do you start accepting a healthy relationship?
Yeah. So I think it's important to have some practical steps for the people who are listening. And that is the term red flag. What are the red flags?
I don't have a red flag here, but yes, they're all over.
Make a list of what red flags are. For instance, if I accomplish something and that person criticizes me for what I accomplished or diminishes what I did, like I just got a promotion. Oh, well, you know, you should have gotten, three promotions by now, but, or whatever they say. Or I just gave a speech that moved people, and the response that that person gives is that I'm in a relationship with is, you really didn't look good while you were giving that, or you weren't, you didn't seem confident, or whatever it was, and they can only put you down. That would be an example of a red flag. Someone who wants to rain on your parade. That would be a red flag for me.
Hmm.
And that's a real example of something I've experienced in my own relationships. So that would be one example. Another example of a red flag would be someone who withholds affection, maybe,
Ooh, good
that could be
one.
another one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or because we have to see what our needs are. And if our needs aren't being met, then or if I give a compliment and they don't receive it, we could have our own set, but I would strongly encourage people who are listening, if they know that they've been in toxic relationships, if you know that, to make a list of your red flags. It's simple. And then when they come up, it's much better to bolt when someone who may have been a keeper, maybe what you throw them out, like I'm using the example, the analogy, like a fish. If you're fishing and then you get one is like, oh, this could have been a keeper, but you see a red flag and you just overreact to that. It's better to do that at the beginning, I believe, than to be too forgiving if we're people pleasers, to be too acquiescent if we are someone who tends to be flexible and go with the flow with certain behaviors. So that's what I would say. And to find ways to boost your own self-esteem, to bring it back to what we were talking about with our self-esteem. How can I learn to, it's a tall order to love ourselves, I think. It is for me. But to like ourselves, to respect ourselves, that's some work that we can do so we feel that we deserve good treatment, you know? And so how can I learn self-love so that I'm not denying myself of what I believe in my heart of hearts that I deserve? Those would be two steps that I would say.
I like the idea of writing a list because everyone obviously is going to be different. I think probably an easy start would be belief system. Do you have the same belief systems as the other person? Because that could be more black and white at that point. When you were talking, one of the things I never thought was a negative comment for whatever reason, but I got this a lot from previous bosses and including relationships, was you're too positive, too optimistic. You're not realistic enough. Never clicked. Never clicked. So, be aware of things that are more passive aggressive, comments that are not so out there, like, a very obvious dismissal or whatever. Like for me, things like that are more, passive. It didn't click. So really take this, one of the exercises that Abraham Hicks has on when you're trying to do manifestation, the easiest way to start is to write a list of everything you don't like, which is the red flags. And then that's going to show you and will help you work towards what you do want and what you do like. And it becomes more exact, more detailed.
Well,
Um,
yeah, and I do want to say when we're saying manifestation for people who don't really know that terminology, I mean it's just like what kind of life do you want to create? What
mhm.
is it that you what is the relationship that you want to have? Because it's just about being intentional. If what is my intention? Otherwise, and this is I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to put that in there. Is if I'm going for something. It's either think my old patterns are going to run in the background or I'm going to live more on purpose. Sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to throw that
No,
in
no,
there.
no. And that's the perfect guidance, I think, to help you be more intentional, which was I was going to go into because you kind of have like a cheat sheet or a checklist to help start, and then it'll help you with the feelings that you get, when it's kind of wrong and then you're trying to figure out why does that feel wrong. And then you have a checklist of the things that you're aiming for to change about yourself and to, get to that level of emotional maturity that you would like to get to later on. So I really like the whole that checklist part that you were saying, the red flags, because that's also your list of intentions. I know I don't want this, but I want that, and that's
Bam.
my intention.
I love that. So we're talking about what are the red flags, what we don't want. What are the green flags?
Yeah,
We
yeah,
just made up
yeah.
our own
You
term.
did.
Probably not. I don't know. But what are the green flags? What do I want? What do I not want? So, and so we can make a list of those two things. What's not
Mm-hmm.
okay and what do I want in a relationship, and become more aware of those things. It's the simplest things are, and the most obvious things can be the most transforming. So it's like we could read all kinds of books about how to have a healthy relationship. We could go to years of therapy, and those things are great. I'm writing a book, and I would like you to buy it if you. but but sometimes a very simple one thing that we focus on, like what are my red flags? Stay with that. And what do I want? Stay with that. And that one thing can transform your life rather than just taking in more and more information in our personal development journey.
Yeah, and
Keep
I
it simple.
think even you can take it one level, once you get used to that and you're finding that you're getting more grounded and you're able to be more mindful or whatever, then you can go into the yellow flag, right? Which I just added on because there's going to be some give and takes in relationships. So it can't be like a hard ass no or hard
Right.
ass yes. There's going to be like, I know I'm still attracted to some traits that are probably, for others, probably not, ideal, but I know that I need to accept it. So, what is
Mm-hmm.
my threshold? What am I willing to take? How do I know that this is, a trait that is going to be more, I guess, positive than negative? So I have to balance that trait. I have to figure out what is it that I'm willing to deal with. And with that emotional maturity, hopefully the other individual, you can have like a safe word, bananas, or have that conversation. It's like, wait, we're getting escalated. Let's take a break and then let's think about it and let's come back and converse in a different situation or a different way. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I mean, there's definitely red, super easy, green, and I love the idea that you had. Just focus on one red flag and just focus on like what is the one that really pisses you off, and then just work on that, and then everything else will just start to follow because it actually does get easier and easier. And then you get to a point where you're like, nah, I'm good, thanks. you know?
Yeah, it's important to say that when we're pissed off and we're angry, it a lot of the times it means there's a boundary that's been violated. Now, it could also mean that we're being defensive, like we used as far as that example,
Mm-hmm.
where we're not seeing something that we need to see in ourselves and we're projecting things on somebody else. But so much of the time, if it's and we'll know when that red flag takes place, when that red flag happens. If someone criticizes us, that's cut and dried, and they criticize us in a way or they're trying to hurt us in some sort of way. They're trying to demean us. They're trying to control us. Another red flag for so many people can be, I don't want you to wear that. You look like a slut. I want you to wear what I want you to wear. Or I want you to look like more of a slut. And I'm sorry, I'm being crass, but whatever the situation is, and I look in our culture, I'm just talking about sexuality. I don't want to trigger anybody, but I'm saying so many controlling men can say, I want you to look sexy so you make me look good, or you look too sexy because I don't want anybody else to look at you.
Mm-hmm.
Those would be examples of a boundary that's been violated, and when we're being treated in a way that's not respectful. So there is the I love this. There's the red flag, which is this is not okay. There's the green flag. This is what I want. And the yellow flag. How about this, Nada? Tell me what you think about this. The yellow flag is something that doesn't feel right, but this is I don't want to say gray area because we're already using yellow, but, but this is the place where we need to communicate.
Oh, yeah.
We need to
Okay.
communicate, and communication, that's how we learn and that's how we grow. A red flag for me is if someone doesn't want to communicate, and I've been there in a relationship, and that person, whenever I try to communicate, they're just stalemate. It just bounces off and they don't want to hear it, or they just get defensive and lash out at me. Well, that's a red flag. But if there can be a yellow flag time where we talk it out and learn, that's when we can grow together and elevate together. And ultimately, anyone who's listening to this is on a personal development journey. So it's really nice, and it's a tall order sometimes, but it's really nice to find somebody else on a personal development journey. Even if you can go to retreats together or go to workshops together and find ways to communicate, and there are different ways that you can communicate and mirror back what someone says and say, hey, listen, I hear you. Now here's my perspective. What do you think about that? I mean, I won't go into that in this conversation, but there's some beautiful ways that people can work on things together. And you mentioned the safe word, like, hey, this, and sometimes it can be something funny. And you've mentioned this before, like, I don't know what would be like yellow dinosaur or whatever it would be. Then you know that things are getting really, kind of out of control or whatever. So there are ways that we can work together in that yellow flag area, right?
And I think honestly, you're not going to find, there's no one on this planet that's going to be all green. It's going to be red, green, and yellow. But you want that person to be in the yellow. So when you get to the red, like you were saying, it's the communication. If that's another red flag, if they're not willing to communicate, not they should not be with you, because if you're willing to communicate and they're not willing to reciprocate, that's a red flag. So that's a great checkpoint. Is this person able to communicate effectively, and reciprocate what I'm looking for to grow together? And that's something that we all miss. I mean, don't get me wrong, when people get married again, relationships, the end goal is like, oh yeah, we're a team, we're gonna grow together, woohoo, all this and that. But during that process, you stop being the team. You really do. And in that process of not being the team, because more life happens, you have more financial obligations, you have more, now you have a family, or you have your parents, or you're taking care of, or what have you. You have more things on you.
Mm-hmm.
The communication starts to go. And I used to feel really guilty. And this is where you were talking about being self-compassion. um, I used to feel really guilty for having these feelings, and understanding that we're all stressed out and we all trying to survive and make the best living out of what we have. And, don't let it affect the kids, or don't let it affect this or whatever. I used to carry the guilt until I realized, no, it's okay. It's okay to feel this way. It's okay that I have things that I don't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
if that person's not willing to communicate or help with me, grow with me, it's okay to bow out.
Yeah, yeah. So, right. So, what we're talking about is have the intention of the kind of relationship you want to have, and then being able to honor ourselves and our feelings, whatever that looks like.
Yep.
That's part of being mindful. And then being willing to see, especially at the beginning of a relationship, what the red flags are. Keep in mind what our green flags are. And then where the yellow flags are, we can communicate. And also keep in mind, boy, don't we all know this, that early in a relationship, and this includes me, and certainly I would imagine includes you too, we don't show our whole self. I mean, it's just the way it is. We're not going to, those red flags don't pop up right away.
I
We're
know.
in the honeymoon phase and everything's all great.
Yep.
And there are all these really cool neurotransmitters and things being released in our brain, and there's all this beautiful stuff. But then when that subsides, and then we start getting into day-to-day routine, and then gosh, like you're mentioning, having children and all the things that people do together, there are always challenges. And I just think it's so important to point out that, do we really want a really healthy relationship? Because I mean, like when I say a really healthy relationship, I mean where there's no problems. If there are no problems and no conflict, then we're not learning, we're not growing, and we're not becoming closer, because through the conflict, there's an example to become closer. We all know what makeup sex is. And if you're a guy, and you're a guy who's listening, we all know what it's like to get in an argument with another guy. I mean, I got in fistfights when I was in high school with a couple of guys, and we became buddies after that. Because when there is this really deep conflict, that's actually a form of intimacy. So if you can grow through that intimacy without being completely unconscious and really hurting somebody verbally, and obviously there's physical violence is not okay. I'm talking about when I was a young kid. We grow out of things like that. So physical violence, emotional, mental abuse, and any kind of invalidation and gaslighting, all of those things that are toxic, we have to be able to either get the hell out when we realize this is unhealthy and this is not okay, and we have to have the courage, like you said, to do that. Or if there are things that are more yellow flags and things that we can work through to work through them through healthy communication, staying present, not reacting, and being able to be vulnerable and say, this is my concern, and this is to not lay it on the other person. This is how I feel. And when you did this, I feel this way. It's kind of a cliche, and let the other person talk and see if there's a place you can meet where there's an understanding. So it's understanding the other person, but communicating what's going on without blaming. So, and then I think a really beautiful thing to point out, because we really want to merge with that other person, because I think a beautiful thing to point out is communication. The root word of communication is what? Can you
Oh my gosh.
commune?
Okay. See, you can't throw
Commune.
things like that to me. I don't think like that.
I know.
Commune.
I'm saying, I like words. So commune. So that's what communication is. So it's knowing that the intention and the intention is, for us to be closer because we love people, and that's what love is. It's communion. And so I think it's so important to know things that are important to us, and what's important to us. Check with those green flags. What are those healthy for me? Like, I have to ask myself, in this relationship, am I being treated? This is me. Am I being treated with respect? Is that person really seeking to understand me? Do they have my best interest in mind? Are they looking to nurture me? Are they letting me nurture them? Are they willing to be vulnerable with me? All those kinds of things that are really garden variety, healthy things. And I don't know about your experience, but my experience is that when I'm unaware, everybody around me sees it when it's unhealthy before I do.
Yes. Always the case. And the one thing I also want to say is, no, unless this is a violent experience that you're having, take your time, really think about it, really ingest the information that you're processing, really take to heart these checkpoints that these things that you now have resources to look at. Because the one thing that I can say from experience is, if you leave and come back, it just gets worse. You go back into a deeper honeymoon
Yeah,
phase, and then it gets
yeah,
worse. And take your time. Wherever you're at in your journey is where you're meant to be at that point. Again, unless it's violent, but it's probably because you're not ready yet. So take this information, process it, see how it fits within your life right now. Know that wherever you're at this moment is okay, and start the process of integrating this information and just putting the pieces together as how it fits well for you, because only you can put your own puzzle together.
yeah. That's beautiful. I totally agree. And I think there are two things that I have to ask myself, and that I think are so important: is this an addiction, or is it a relationship? And it's important, I think, to point out that we get addicted to things like drama. And there's, I don't want to get it. There's a whole, we're coming to the end, so there's a whole other door I could open that I won't. But there is the pattern of, oh, this person is showing me love, or they're showing me care, and then there's abuse. There's love and there's abuse, and we
Mhm.
get addicted to that, and that's where the addiction can happen. So that's one thing. And another thing that I think is so important, that I didn't come up with this, but I heard someone speak about this not too long ago, is, if I am, and I'll keep this about me, if I am saying to myself, there's something about the person. And my friend is like, I don't, what do you mean? What is it? I don't know. It's just something. They have this thing. It's like, okay, but what is it? And really, yes, things aren't on a checklist, but if it seems mysterious, a lot of the time it's trauma bonding. It's something from our past that is attracting us that's not healthy. But if we can see, am I being treated XYZ, which are
Hmm.
our green flags, which are healthy for us? If they do check off some of those things, like they're treating me with respect and love and care, and they have my best interest in mind and all those things. If those things are XXX, but there's this mysterious thing, then it's usually unhealthy. That's what I know from my own
No,
experience.
it's true. You think it's some sort of a lore, mysterious, like, oh, je ne sais pas, something cool. Blah. But actually, no, 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 don't even think about it. But, like you said, these things take time to come to our awareness when we're doing these things. So again, it's just being patient because oh gosh, I wish everything could be so easy and so fast so you can just check things out and then a week or two realize, oh, that person wasn't good for me or whatever. But no, it doesn't work like that. It's slow forming. So it's better to be patient, take the time, and that way you will save yourself from years of resentment and anger or whatever comes afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. And let's face it, we don't want to watch a romantic movie where there's no conflict. I mean, we human beings, we grow from conflict, but if things were just completely easy, then not only would we not grow, but let's be honest, we'd be bored. So
100%. I know I would be. I'm super feisty. I want some of it back.
I know this has been a great conversation, Nada. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, guys, for anyone that would like to get some coaching services from Mr. Kent, where can you be found?
You can find me at kentscheibel.com, KentScheibel. It's so funny you bring that up because how can people get in touch with you, Nada?
At Guided Counsel or here at Coach Nada. I work on the metaphysical esoteric side of things though. So not necessarily life coaching services like Kent. I do a little different thing. So you can always check my YouTube out for more information.
Is there anything else you'd like to say about that or just point them to the YouTube?
Just YouTube for now. I'm re-innovating again. So I'm working on that part of the guided counsel portion of it because it's time to unleash the beast.
So yeah, yeah, beautiful. And if you are, what I really specialize in is if you're dealing with a lot of depression and God knows if you've thought about taking your life or anything and you're dealing with horrible grief, I've been there, and I have a whole system to help people get through that. So you can always just instant message me or Nada with either one of those things. So
Yep. All right. Thank you so much. And happy 10th Instagram live anniversary,
yeah,
right?
it's
This
our
is our 10th episode.
anniversary.
Yes.
Yes.
So
All
happy anniversary.
right,
Maybe we should go out and celebrate.
let's go out and celebrate, Nada. We'll do it.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.